All right, there was this big announcement today from Columbia University and the White House. It was actually announced yesterday that this conflict between the Trump White House and Columbia, Trump White House cut off all research funding for Columbia, threatened to punish it in all sorts of other ways based on alleged claims that they tolerate anti-Semitism, that they allow Jewish students to be harassed, all those claims that the Trump administration has been making to gain greater control over the curriculum at colleges, speech codes at colleges, faculty hiring at colleges. Columbia capitulated, as it was clear they were going to do, and they announced a major new deal with the Trump administration to restore their funding. Samsonite, about that deal, asked this, quote, "Did Columbia really just put Trump on the dole? $200 million, pardon my language, but you need to help me understand what the hell is going on here. Thank you for all the great work you do." God, you must be very well-spoken, very polite if you have to apologize for what the hell is going on here and say, pardon my language. For a lot of people, that is actually very elevated language. So congratulations on that. And then there's a related issue that I'll get to with this next question. But the Columbia deal is basically, a lot of it doesn't make sense on its face, because the idea is it's a deal to restore financing of the U.S. government to Columbia, even though part of the deal is that Columbia has to pay $200 million to the Trump administration, kind of as a punishment or a fee. They're accepting that they'll lose $200 million for all the naughty and bad things that they did, and allowing too much criticism of Israel, and allowing protests to get out of control in the view of the Trump administration, and in general, just allowing too much anti-Semitic thought and ideas and expression to the point that Jewish students are being endangered. There's also lawsuits brought by Jewish students against Columbia that Columbia is now agreeing to pay millions of dollars in order to settle. So congratulations to the very put upon and marginalized and oppressed Jewish students at Columbia, who are now going to get major payoffs for all the hardship and the harassment and the oppression and marginalization they had to endure from seeing protests that made them uncomfortable. But you can believe that Columbia University allowed the protest to get out of hand if you want. We've gone over this many times before. The history of student protest in this country has been an iconic part of the college experience. The protests against the Vietnam War in the 60s were infinitely more disruptive and radical than the protests throughout 2023, mostly into 2024 at most campuses, where the resistance was largely symbolic. The the campus protests at almost every school, including Columbia, were filled with Jewish students themselves, despite all this speech about how these protests were dangerous and harassing for Jewish students. Huge numbers of Jews composed these protests and these encampments. We interviewed several of them, to the point that every Friday night, inside the Columbia encampment, supposedly the most anti-Semitic one, the most dangerous one, with a history at the school of anti-Semitism, there were Shabbat dinners for all the protesters, where Muslim and Christian and Jewish students, as part of these protests, would all get together for Shabbat dinner. They celebrated Muslim holidays as well, and Christian holidays together. So there was a huge exaggeration, which there always is, of any threat anytime the government wants to seize power over our private institutions or academic institutions. There's also a lot of misconception about the funding that comes from the U.S. government to these universities. The reason that the government funds universities, they don't fund them and just say, here's $500 million for you to use how you want. They task these universities, who can attract the greatest minds from all over the world, to pay for research facilities and labs, to research cures and treatments, to research all sorts of technology, including military technology. That's where a lot of military technology comes from, is at these universities. This is not a charity. It's being done to keep the United States competitive, and a lot of the research ends up being done in our elite universities. And never before has this money come with attachments about what views can be heard on campus or what kinds of professors can teach certain things and how they have to be approved by the government. So two of the things that Columbia University has done that jeopardize free speech rights and academic freedom, not for foreign students and not in ways that pertain to the right to protest. It has nothing to do with the protest. It has nothing to do with foreign students. It's purely about the expression of ideas, the peaceful expression of ideas in a classroom, in a student newspaper, or what can be taught in schools. So part of it is that the curriculum for certain departments, obviously beginning with the Middle East Studies Department, which is the one of greatest interest to the government because that's where Israel can be criticized and discussed, now has to be subject to the review of the federal government. And on top of that, and even worse, the Trump administration demanded that Columbia adopt what Harvard has already adopted under government pressure and other universities as well, which is a radically expanded hate speech code that outlaws and bans ideas that have always been permissible to express at our leading universities under the First Amendment and the basic notions of academic freedom, but that are not outlawed. You're not allowed, for example, to call Israel a racist endeavor, even though you're allowed to call the United States a racist endeavor. You're allowed to call any other country a racist endeavor, just not Israel. You're not allowed to say that Jews played a role in killing Jesus, even though Christians have believed this for centuries. You're not allowed to say it. It's not like you can say it and then other people get to debate it. Talk about, no, the Romans played a greater role. No, this tax does. What does it mean? Maybe nothing for... No, just no discussion of that. That's now deemed anti-Semitic. You can't subject Israel to criticism that somehow you can't prove you subject other countries equally to the exact same criticism. So like if you criticize Israel for engaging in a genocide, but you haven't said the same thing about some faction in the Sudan that does the same thing, you can be guilty of anti-Semitism, even you may not talk about the Sudan because your government has no role in it while your government funds and arms what's happening in what's being done in Gaza. Now suddenly you have this burden of proof when you criticize Israel to show that you criticize other countries in exactly the same way. You don't have that burden of proof for any other country. You can criticize China without having to prove that you criticize other countries in the same way. You just have to, that burden is only for Israel. You're not allowed to say that certain Jewish individuals seem to have more loyalty to Israel than they do to the United States, even though it's so clearly it's true. People like Ben Shapiro and Barry Weiss and so many others not allowed to say that anymore, not allowed to express that. If you do, you're now in violation of the expanded hate speech code that the Trump administration demanded Columbia institute to govern not the foreign speech of foreign students, but the speech of American students and American faculty members and what can be taught in curricula. And the whole point of this is to severely chill what can be said to young people about Israel, what people who are young can say about Israel on college campuses without risking punishment. What do you think about that for a minute? How unbelievably severe that is, how seriously grave of an assault on free speech that is, not in defense of marginalized American groups, which is bad enough, but in defense of a foreign country and its interests and those who are loyal to it. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.